Excuse me while I adjust my battery pack here so it doesn't pop out. Okay. All right. I hear the chimes out, so I think we're going to have more people joining us in a second. If you are wanting to hear about technology, process automation, data quality, you are very much in the right place. And for those that don't, they're missing out. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. I have three amazing panelists. We're going to kind of go in an interesting kind of path to talk about what process automation means in logistics, how to get there, how to sort of build the foundation to enable process automation, where things are going. So we're going to cover a lot of ground. We have about 40 plus minutes to do that. I have the Slido app. It wasn't working before. It should be working now. So get your questions in. I will answer as many of them as possible. I forgot to say, I'm Eric Johnson, Senior Technology Editor at the Journal of Commerce. I write about technology all the time. So I am super excited about this panel. I'm going to have our three panelists introduce themselves because they will do a far better job of that than I ever could. And then we'll jump into the discussion. If it doesn't seem like the questions are coming in through the app, just raise your hand. It's a small group, a small room here, so let's keep it interactive, okay? And I'm sure our panelists are happy to answer any of your questions. So Melissa, would you like to tell us a little bit about your small little boutique you run?
Yes, so Melissa Contrivo, I am the Director of International Logistics for Five Below. Those of you who are not familiar with Five Below, we are a retailer across the US. We cater to teens and tweens. We have all kinds of commodities. We're growing rapidly, so if you haven't seen us, you will soon.
Awesome. My name is Jake Hoffman. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Gnosis Freight. Gnosis Freight is at a high level a visibility company, but really we do everything around the container. We work with Five Below. We have some other customers here that we work with. Visibility data, everything around container tracking, we're really, really good at, but then we extend it into all the edge processes and things that come with that data, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. Alyssa Myers, Vice President of Technology at RXO. For those of you who aren't familiar with RXO, we were essentially born out of a company you may be familiar with called XPO last November, on November 1st. We became a separate publicly traded company, so we really specialize in technology-enabled freight brokerage, and we have complementary services in managed transportation, last mile, and global forwarding as well. Cool.
So we have shipper, technology provider, and a technology forward service provider. So I think it's a great mix to talk about this. How many of you were in the opening session today that was talking about automation? Just show of hands. Okay, cool. So I think this is a nice bookend for that, because we talked a bit about automation, and it went way beyond my pay grade, some of what Chad was talking about this morning. Probably is Jake's pay grade. Jake and Chad are awesome, because the reason I asked both of them to talk is because it's really hard to convey sort of some of the nitty-gritty of what automation is to people who are not from a technical background, aka myself. So it's a really valuable commodity to be able to talk about that. So let's maybe kick off by talking about some of the foundational elements that need to be in place in order to enable what we talk about when we talk about process automation, which Chad described his definition of process automation, but maybe we can also level set on that as well in sort of talking about some of these foundational elements. Alyssa, do you want to talk about it, like what you think about in terms of serving your customers, but also internally having internal stakeholders that need to be able to like understand and use automation?
Yeah, so maybe kind of going back to your point first on foundations, one of the most, I would say, pervasive foundation that always comes to mind first for me when we talk about automation is the importance of the role that data plays, and really having a thorough, comprehensive, well thought out data collection strategy. And the other benefit to this, not only does the data kind of help power the automation down the road, but what it also can do is it can provide you with essentially like a tool set to really start to analyze the data and understand where the opportunities are in your business for process automation, and the degree of benefit that those automation areas can kind of provide for your organization.
Yep. And real quickly, process automation, give your definition of what that means to RXO, both your internal customers, but also your actual customers.
Yeah, so it's a very wide variety, I think, of different capabilities. But at the end of the day, you know, when we talk about process automation for us internally and also for our stakeholders, being our shippers and our carriers, it's really taking activities that maybe are highly prone for error, and the cost of those errors is very high, and implementing a solution, leveraging technology to essentially streamline you know, that process from end to end. So that's kind of really how we conceptualize it. Maybe just using a few examples. It could be automation technology just in our transportation management systems that we build out. I think another area that people don't always think about as process automation, but I definitely look at it that way, especially when we talk about external stakeholders, are integrations, things like API, things like EDI. These are all technology capabilities that allow us to more seamlessly interact with other parties in the supply chain, and essentially removes manual effort from those processes.
Yep. Jake, what are definition of process automation from your perspective and for your customers,
Sure.
and foundational elements of it?
Sure. So this really plays directly into the story of Gnosis, and where we came into the business with the idea of we want to automate those edge processes or anything around a container. So think like some of the things that fall into that process automation category for us is like allocating drayage to drayage carriers, or sending delivery orders, identifying which containers are in demurrage or storage at a rail yard. And so our idea was like, hey, we're not going to be the data people. We're going to go get this data from all these different players in the space, develop dashboards, write code that'll send delivery orders and do those kind of things. But then the foundation of that is the data. Obviously, if you don't have good data underlying to do all those things, then it doesn't matter. And so we tried to buy data from people and source it from forwarders and carriers and whoever it was, and nothing was ever good enough by our standards to be able to do that. And so we'd be, hey, Jake, why is this ETA wrong? And we would just play the, oh, well, our provider gave it to us and did this. And so the foundation we decided was so important that we set out to kind of build our own data model, which is like we will get data from the rail carrier, from the terminal, from the ocean carrier, from satellite data, whatever it is, to build that internal data piece solely for the original purpose of being able to automate those things, to be able to tell Melissa at Five Below how many containers we're going to get to a rail terminal in a certain week so that they could plan. And in building that data model, of course, there's been other opportunities for Gnosis since then to use that data in other facets, but those automation pieces are what we originally set out to do, and in order to do so, we had to end up building our own data model as well.
Yep, very interesting. So, Melissa, we'll get into your specific use case, which is super interesting, but from a really high level as a shipper, how do you think about the challenge of automation as this big picture of we know we need to automate certain aspects of our business, but where do we start? What do we need to actually make it happen? Do we rely on a technology provider? Do we rely on our 3PLs to help us with that? How do you sort of think about that?
I think Jake kind of hinted towards it before. You know, there's a lot of complexity in gathering all of that data together and being able to know what's good, what's bad, what's reliable. So I think for us, when we think about it, you know, our end goal was to have complete visibility end to end and ensure that we could forecast to our distribution centers when they're going to get product in, and then they could properly staff. So for us, it was just a matter of, you know, we need this kind of one-stop shop, if you will, instead of looking at all these different points. But we also need that layer of predictive analytics because we know there's variables. So to not go off, you know, that's basically what we were looking for ease of automation.
And so in terms of who does that work, is Five Below not in a position to sort of build something like that internally, or is it our resources are better spent using people that do this all day?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. We have been doing it manually, and as we continue to grow, you know, I think we're not a technology company, so our time and focus is better spent operationally, making sure that the business is successful. And if we can partner with, you know, a visibility provider that makes, you know, our jobs easier and gives us reliable information, then I think it's a success.
Yeah, interesting. So you heard it. Not every company is a technology company, right? That's the most overused thing. Everybody's a technology company or a media company or a bank. No. Focus on what you actually are good at. Okay, Alyssa, I wanted to ask, sort of scanning across your shipper customer base in terms of what they expect from you from an automation perspective. How are you sort of catering to those different demands of, because every shipper I would imagine you interact with is at a different level of sophistication on that. So how do you sort of make that manageable from a scale perspective to cater to that? And maybe specifically, like, what are they looking to you from automation perspective?
Yeah, so maybe addressing the first part of your question first in terms of what they're really looking to us for. And you bring up the very valid point that all of our shippers have very different needs. Some are more sophisticated technically, some are less sophisticated technically. And that's where we put a lot of emphasis on providing options to shippers. If they have a technology team and they're a little bit more sophisticated, we can start to look toward automation using API integrations with systems. If they don't, we actually do offer tools that have a front end, a web interface that they can interact with and essentially leverage automation that we've built in based on standard use cases for them there. So those are kind of, I guess, the things that we bring to the table as it relates to kind of our shippers' needs. But overall, they really understand, I think, the importance and the value that automation can bring. Maybe not in like the nature of a technical conversation, but in the nature of understanding the importance of the service that we provide. So when I say that, essentially what automation does, even if it's a little bit more internally focused for us, what it does is it allows us to spend more time and more energy on those higher value activities, which at the end of the day, service being king, to the shippers, it really allows us to not only outperform and exceed their expectations, but also allows us to scale as a business without making any sacrifices on the service side.
So you're in a unique position. The reason I find the way technology is consumed by 3PLs across domestic, international, everything, the most interesting is because you're in a position where you have to build for yourself, you have to build for your customer, you have to build for asset-based companies that you need to get capacity from. So you sort of have to do all of the above, right? And it's about prioritizing where investment can go, right? So would you say RXO is primarily focused on sort of automation from an internal perspective so that you're able to serve customers in sort of a more human way? Or is there any sort of impetus on, no, we need to automate the interaction with the customer, some sort of like self-service portal, or just things going on in the background that the customer may not even know, but it's part of that interface with them?
Yeah, so our focus is really on both the internal and the external automation opportunity.
I need you to choose. No, I'm just kidding.
I can't pick. They're both very important. But maybe to another nuance of your question too, we do put a lot of energy into the automation aspects of the transaction. And that's really what has allowed us to scale as an organization. And even when our shippers scale, and they have periods of peak needs, it allows us to better service those needs in a very seamless manner, still offering superior service. But what I would also maybe add on top of that, because I mentioned really focusing on automating aspects of the transaction, it's hard to have this conversation and not talk about generative AI and kind of what that's opening up.
Yep.
And the way I see generative AI really kind of helping with the automation evolution is in the aspect that Gen AI can really help us automate more strategic pieces of the business, not just the process where we have known inputs and we're expecting a known output. So I think that's going to provide some very interesting areas for organizations like all of ours to explore down the road.
And just real quickly, because you talked about RXO as doing managed trans as well as sort of traditional freight brokerage and probably some services kind of in between. So is automation a bigger piece of the managed trans where you're empowering your own internal teams to run and the shipper doesn't even need to worry about that? Or is it more focused around the sort of automating the transaction on the brokerage side?
Yeah, it's a great question because the automation does take different forms based on the service that we're providing to the shipper.
Yep.
So in the brokerage space, there's a lot of focus on transactional automation, automatically creating orders, automatically covering orders. But then in the managed transportation side, first of all, I would call out we see a very vast kind of variety of needs from managed transportation shippers, ranging from complexity on the very high end to, sometimes a little bit less complex shippers. But depending on that, there are, different categories of automation that we can leverage on the managed trans side too. But they just take a slightly different form a lot of times at larger scale, things like that. So.
Okay. Melissa, you're our shipper prism for the shipper audience, right? So how do you sort of think about what entity is best suited to serve you from an automation perspective? Like obviously you're working with Gnosis, but you must use forwarders and 3PLs and brokers as well. Like who's ultimately in the best place to serve you from a technology/automation perspective?
Well, I think they all serve us in different ways, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, our forwarders, they give us particular information, whether it be origin consolidation or it's specific shipment information, booking information. We get information from all these different places, and I think the biggest thing for us is, again, what is most important? What are the milestones that mean something to us? I think as a shipper, when you look at all these different visibility providers, the thing you're looking for is flexibility. You're looking to be able to customize to your needs and to your business processes. Not every shipper, cares what, maybe the gate out date is or cares when it arrives. Maybe they just have one single milestone that they're tracking that they need to report. So I think for us, we think that there's an importance across all of the platforms that we use, but we definitely needed to find this one system that took it all and put it together for us.
Yep. So, Jake, how do you guys sort of weigh? Alyssa is one of many 3PLs in the market. Obviously, there's a lot of 3PLs in the market.
Right.
Some of them are very technology forward, and they are very, they market that aspect of it almost above the service, almost above what capabilities they have, like physical capabilities. How do you sort of approach a shipper to say, actually, a neutral software vendor is in the best place to help you on the path to automation versus a 3PL, even if they have great technology like Alyssa does?
Right. I mean, I think one of the main points that we try to convey to our customers is being that agnostic, third party that can take data from a freight forwarder, an ocean carrier, whoever it is, gives the shipper the flexibility that when times change, if there's a new logistics provider in the market, whatever it is, we've kind of developed that layer between the shipper and getting data from these places where we can do that on behalf of them. Every time you onboard a new carrier, if you needed to go start doing the full EDI, the transactions to get all the data to them, that becomes just another barrier to entry to bring on a new provider that might have great service, but then there's that technology piece to it. We have worked with the least tech capable all the way up to the most tech capable, everything from it's just hitting an API endpoint to get all of our customers' shipments so that we can start tracking it ourselves, to they send us a daily Excel file and an email, and we rip out the data we need from that and do all the tracking ourselves. We've done a great job. I think our team has done a great job of being super flexible to that standpoint where we enable our customers to choose the best service provider that fits whatever they're looking for, independent of their technology footprint and how they can do it.
So they can isolate, this provider always has capacity on that lane. Even if their data is not great, you
Correct.
can be that sort of like fill in
Exactly.
that gap for them. That's interesting. Okay.
That's right.
All right. So let's maybe dive into your specific use case, Melissa, because the reason you started working with Gnosis was for a very particular reason. Do you want to talk about kind of what your problem set was or your problem statement and how you went about trying to solve that and how it ended up with Gnosis?
Sure. So ultimately, we started really looking into visibility providers when we opened up our Indianapolis DC. And the real constraint that we had was being able to predict the rail, which I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody here. We just weren't getting good information. And no matter what we did, we still had inconsistencies and we weren't able to forecast appropriately to the DC so that they could plan labor. So that was initially what started it. We had been looking just in general to try to enhance the data that we had. When we started talking with Gnosis, I think what really stuck out to us was the fact that they are so focused on the international piece, right? That was kind of unique in the industry, at least for us and for what we were seeing. And in terms of the rail, they had enhanced features that we weren't getting from other places. So, that was the problem, right? And so in terms of, what we were looking for, it was going to be, an easy implementation. We didn't have time to get IT involved. We didn't have time to do like a long drawn out implementation. We really needed a quick fix. We needed to know where our freight was, and we needed to know that all of the work that we were doing in-house. So, basically, I have a team that would go out and track every single container, look on marine traffic, look at the terminals, try to figure out where it is, and then use their own predictive analytics
Carrier websites.
to try to figure out when it's going to show up. And they do a great job, but they are, kind of constrained with the information that they have access to. So, so we ended up going into a trial period with Gnosis where we can say, hey, listen, we're going to still do our tracking, but why don't you also do it? And then let's see whose information is better, right? We did it for quite a while, a couple months, and we, week over week when we would look at it, Gnosis was always closer in terms of forecasting. And some of the variances were pretty great. So we knew that there was benefit.
Over your previous process?
Over our previous process.
Okay. Yep. Right.
What really kind of sealed the deal was the fact when we would do these weekly reviews, and we did say, okay, well, you're, at X amount of containers arriving, this is what actually showed up. Your forecast is better, but how can we improve on what we still missed? And they were able to take that and do a deep dive and then enhance the predictive analytics that they have. So it was still a work in progress, so their information was better to start with, but then they worked with us to continue to figure out how they could enhance the data.
What was still missing.
Yeah.
And what was the downstream impacts in the DC of not getting it right internally?
So, obviously, there's a big labor implication there, right?
Okay.
So if we under forecast, they're not going to have the staff. If
Yep.
we over forecast, so I think.
In terms of which containers were actually making it.
Yeah,
on
so
time, yeah.
so essentially, my team is responsible from PO placement all the way to DC delivery. So as soon as that container is assigned, we're tracking it. And we're providing our DCs across the US a forecast for current week and then the next few weeks out from that. So if there's big variances and they, are, not able to staff to that, then it comes into play where, we have containers that are sitting there that aren't able to be unloaded, or, they have the staff and now they have to send them home because there wasn't what we thought we were going to get. So the implications were pretty big, and that's why we went out and tried to.
How big was the variance? Like what was not the worst week, but like average variance? How much are we talking about?
So we had some big variances. Sometimes it would be 10%, sometimes it could be 30%. It just depended. And because our business is seasonal, once you get into some of the peak weeks, so that variance can get much higher.
Yep.
Or if there was an issue on the rail, then that variance could get very high. Like if we, one of the things that I think we'll probably go through in a little bit is we didn't actually realize, we knew that the service route that our containers were going, but we didn't actually realize what was happening to cause delays during that travel. Mm-hmm. And for us, it was like, okay, well, it got on the rail, so where is it? It didn't fall off that we know of, like, where is it? So Gnosis was actually able to give us visibility to all of the stops that it was making, and then, even if there was an issue when it arrived at the destination rail, did it get taken somewhere else? Did it sit there? Did it, so we were really lacking in visibility in that area, and so our predictive analytics only went so far. We're making assumptions. With this, we're now making more educated assumptions, but it's more consistent, and we're more confident in the data.
Okay, very cool. Jake, in terms of hearing the initial problem statement and figuring out how to help Melissa with that, how did you guys approach it? And also, how is this not just a visibility problem, and how is it a process automation problem from your, or eventually a process automation?
Right. I think, and Melissa painted the picture of like, hey, it started better, and then we collaborated to make it even better. So the idea behind our data model is we're tracking, millions of containers, and we're like, so many are coming from Vancouver to Indianapolis, that is the service lane that Melissa's referring to, coming from the west, well, maybe not always Vancouver, maybe it's Los Angeles, wherever it is, coming into that Indianapolis facility. And for us, the more containers we're tracking through there, the better the data gets. It's like we have more and more containers that come from Vancouver or LA or wherever it is, and then we can predict, based on all the past journeys, empirically, how is it going to get to that place. One of the things that we improved on is, it was figuring out how far it is from point A to point B, but then we figured out there's like 4 different pathways it takes to get from point A to point B, so figuring out that it's going to come down to Memphis and then back up to Indianapolis, like using the actual service lanes and the geographical latitude, longitude of where that rail container is at any one point, improved the granularity of the data over time. So we had this that's always getting better and always trying to predict the ETA of the rail. But then to Five Below specifically, and this is where the process automation piece comes in, is they have their own operation in Indianapolis that's getting containers off the rail and getting it to the DC. And so if we can predict when it gets to the rail, but we don't take into account how Five Below does business at all, you can't just do rail arrival plus 1 day. Because Five Below, maybe they have a process where the drayage provider takes it to another yard and then they schedule delivery or whatever it is. And so working with them to get delivery timestamps and things, and then having a separate predictive model that's Five Below specific into how that they run their business gives like a distribution center ETA. So it's not just the data we get from the rail carrier, it's the stuff that they give us, and then we train our models on their data specifically to make it that business case of how many containers are going to be at the DC this week that I need to plan labor for. So it's like taking the normal stuff we do and then extending it based on how they do their business.
Which gets back to, Alyssa, the point that you had made when we first started talking about this panel, is like using the data as a building block to do other things, right?
Yep.
And I want to get to that in a sec, but real quick, Jake, how does sort of the use case of Five Below compare to sort of like similar type of, relationships you have with customers? Like, is it a pretty, not standard, but is it like a kind of a sweet spot use case for you guys? Or?
It is. I think what is standard is that everybody's different. So the standard is that everybody has their own process, and if you talk to a Walmart or an Amazon, the way that they do drayage and how they make deliveries to distribution centers and everything is totally different than how Five Below does, than how any other provider does. Yep. Because everybody has their own process, and that's where we recognize that early on, that we can get really good at standardizing this piece, but then the last piece that oftentimes is the most important for our customers, it's got to be separate. It's got to be how they do business. There's always, hey, like I mentioned the example earlier of a drayage carrier takes it to their yard before, or they're deciding to transload, or that there's like all these different things that each provider does independently that caters into our model, that we just kind of, instead of trying to standardize everything, we're going to have that piece that's always hybrid and agnostic and according to what the customer wants.
Yep. Alyssa, we talked a lot about the layering effect of data playing into automation, and one piece of automation might enable another automation that was not even thought of before you even had the data in place to do the first automation. That was something that Chad talked about in the initial session today, was like when they start automating something at a company, at a brokerage, that brokerage find out, oh, there's 10 other opportunities to automate things. How does that work? Like how do you, like in practice, how does that actually sort of manifest itself?
Yeah, so one example that I can think of in our business specifically around the layering advantages, like you said, of automation is related to, I think I mentioned earlier, we talk a lot about automating order creation and automating order coverage, getting a carrier assigned to a load. But in order to even automate those steps, we have to be able to price the freight. We have to be able to tell the shipper in real time, automatically, this is how much it's going to cost you to move this load. Then when they say yes, we can automate the process of inbounding and accepting that load. I think Melissa gave another really good example when you were talking about how what you were doing with Gnosis allowed you to better forecast, and you were looking a week out, maybe even a little bit longer or further out. But once you're able to actually forecast, you can then say, hey, we're confident that we know how the next 7 to 10 days are going to play out, and now we can start implementing processes to take advantage of that data and actually automate other areas of our business. So I thought that was a really good example that you provided. But all of that to say, it's really important as an organization to have a strategy around automation. It's not about just, oh, I'm going to pick this process and I'm going to pick this process, because you can get a lot of advantages over really strategically thinking about, hey, when I enable this, I'm going to get this as a result. That's really kind of where that value of having an automation strategy comes into play. So.
Well, so if you have a shipper that you're talking to, and maybe they're sort of transactional, or they're strategic from a freight perspective, but they're not strategic like as a partner technology-wise with you yet. How do you start the conversation of, I know we move this freight effectively for you, or we do managed trans for you. How do we elevate the conversation around automation? Like, what do you tend to start with? Because they may not even know what they need, or I mean, earlier today, panelists said, well, you have to ask yourself what you need. But sometimes they don't even know what is the best medicine for them, essentially. So how do you sort of start that conversation?
Yeah, so, and I, I think Jake said it well. Every shipper is different,
Sure.
And they're all going to have different priorities. And so a lot of times, based on the needs that we uncover for a specific shipper, our strategy for that conversation will be a little bit dynamic. But one thing I can say is that where the rubber really meets the road for shippers in terms of really understanding the value of automation, and really, opening up their willingness to really adopt it and embrace it, is when it comes down to improved service, and being able to see exactly where their freight's at a moment in time, being able to predict, and really just having that higher level of service.
And one last question on this. Do you feel the pressure? So we talked this morning about shippers essentially, maybe even subconsciously, putting the onus on their 3PLs to take the burden of technology development and automation development. Do you feel that pressure from them, or is it more of you're bringing that up to them, or are they saying, I need this service level from you, and for you, the only way you can achieve that is through automating some part of it?
I would say it probably falls maybe more into like the latter category, and again, kind of going back to my point around service and just the importance of service. And different shippers, depending on who they are going to have different requirements. A lot of times what we see.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead.
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of times, I thought my mic wasn't working. Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So a lot of times, though, what we'll kind of see is essentially, they'll come to us, they'll have sometimes very baseline kind of basic service requirements. Other shippers, depending, we talked a little bit about managed transportation, have very robust scorecards and requirements that we need to be able to hit from a service perspective. But that, I think, is what really, what we've learned as an organization mandates our level of focus on automation, because having manual processes in place in order to service customers of scale just doesn't work.
Yep.
So it's really table stakes in order to play. So.
Yep. I got so wrapped up in our conversation, I forgot that Gnosis had some slides to present. So just run through them really quick, because I think we may have talked about some of this stuff, but this gives some visuals to that. So.
Right. I don't think there's much. I think there's this and like maybe one more. Yeah. But it's really this. Speaking to the specific problem for Five Below and talking about, Melissa said, like being able to see where containers were on the rail, and it's great to have that visibility into where it is, but then also allow us to figure out where it is and put that predictive layer on top of it to give a better estimate of when it's actually going to get to the rail yard, to the distribution center, and so on. So I thought it was, and Melissa was like, hey, this would be a great thing to show, is all the details in there, that we're consistently getting data from all these places. We're storing it. We're storing everything that we ever track, and then using all the data like this to better predict for everybody, right? I don't know if do you use this?
Is that not working? The green.
The green.
Is that not working? Yeah, there we go.
Oh, there we go. Cool. So yeah, and then of course, like we mentioned, like the getting better at predicting and doing those things. You see on the right side, we split it up by like DC5 and DC7, which is 2 of Five Below specific distribution centers, and then showing like, hey, here's what we're predicting and here's what's actually happening in the past. And these charts and graphs are shifting over time as things happen. As like what we talked about earlier, if there's a disruption in the rail, that something happens where rail transit times are taking longer, then that future estimate maybe gets pushed out. More containers that were supposed to arrive in week 37 start to arrive in week 38. And so it's always dynamically updating, and this is the kind of stuff that we worked with Five Below specifically to take this data and cater it exactly to what they were looking for. What do we have? So even down to like SKU level, number of cartons, that's where we take data that they have, we join it with all of our data together, and then this is particularly helpful for what Melissa was talking about is planning labor. It's like, how many cartons do we literally have to unload from these containers when they're gonna get there?
Yep. Cool, I'm glad, thank you for reminding me. I totally spaced on the slides, so. I'm in general very anti-slide, but I thought the visuals on that help kind of illuminate what Melissa's challenge is. So we have a few questions from the audience, so I'm going to get to those right now. If you have a question, enter it in Slido. Remember to hit ballroom C, otherwise the questions are going to go to the other room, and they're not going to have any idea how to answer them. So this is a great question, actually. This is a broad question, but we'll try to orient it around what we're addressing today. How best to communicate the shipping team's needs to their IT team, who at times, quote unquote, know the best way, right? So I think each of you can kind of take a crack at that. Melissa?
Yeah, so the conversations we have on an operational level are very different than the conversations we have with our IT department, right? So there's different silos there, and they're thinking about things differently. And of course, the end goal is to get the data and visibility across the organization and where it's needed. But I think with what we're trying to do here is kind of bridge that gap. So we'll take Gnosis for example. Gnosis understands our operational needs and requirements, and they're going to handle the IT piece. So we don't have to worry about that. But they're bridging the gap, so they know what it needs or what it takes behind the scenes to get the data to us. And quite honestly, what the shipper cares about is the data. So as long as we're getting it, and it's reliable and it's consistent, then that, I think somebody didn't like the word partnership earlier, but I feel it's a good partnership, so.
Okay. Yeah, Jake, go ahead.
I was just say to that point is, and nothing against IT teams. Like we always, like there always is as a part of the relationship we have with a shipper, with whoever it is, that we do engage with them. But to the point we were just saying is like sometimes they have a lot on their plate. There's internal initiatives and things that they can't get to immediately. And so using Five Below as an example, we don't need to get their IT team to hit our API and get a perfect EDI or whatever kind of integration going. We're getting an emailed report from an origin team or somebody that is like, hey, here's our shipments, can you guys figure this out? And we write code that just takes whatever data they have, whatever format it's in, and then just standardize it to our model, and that's it. So really there's, we say no IT needed. There's always eventually is like, hey, we want to take data out of Gnosis and put it back into our ERP system, or we want to get data out of the ERP that gets down to the SKU level, and all that's easily accomplished, but it's not a precursor in order to get started. That's just the additional value that comes in later.
So this is super interesting because is there any friction in terms of, okay, you're making it easier for her to interact with you without any technical sort of like interaction? Is there any friction from the IT team, from either internally or externally? Like, hey, you guys are doing this and we need to know how that's happening because ultimately we're responsible for the company's systems and data, right? Is there any friction on that?
I wouldn't say there's friction. I would say we have a plan in place, right? So IT or internal organization understands what our needs are and understands that we needed something quickly. And so we had to move forward, and we did not have it built into the plan to have a ERP implementation or, to have the data come into our systems directly. So this was something that I think we were all kind of on board with, but we do have plans to have that, cross data sending and, better than our Excel sheet that we're sending now. But it's, I think and any shippers in the room might agree with me here, anytime you go into a venture that's going to require IT support, it's typically not a quick turnaround.
Right.
and you're going to get a lot of pushback, and you're probably not going to be able to do it the way that you want to do it. So this allows us to have the data, to keep the visibility, and plan ahead so that we can do it the right way.
Well, I think one of the fascinating differences that I try to convey when I'm writing about this is like the starting point for a 3PL investing in tech and a shipper investing in tech is you're competing with a dozen other organizations within your organization that are also have technology needs and budget, and you're one of many, whereas a 3PL tends to be able to invest everything into the business to serve or partner with. So very interesting to hear that. Alyssa, how do you sort of like bridge that gap of like when IT gets involved?
There are two things I would say to this. And the first is, I guess, more of an overarching statement in terms of how RXO's approach to technology, I think, is differentiated at the core, is the fact that technology is not a group that sits outside of the business. It is a group that works alongside the business. Members of my team, myself, we all sit with carrier reps, we sit with sales reps, we watch how they use the system. I join sales calls. And I think being completely embedded as an IT organization in the operation and really understanding the business is like a non-negotiable. Because when that doesn't happen, that's when the friction starts. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is there are situations where sometimes technology, you have a good partnership with operations, but sometimes, we do have to kind of challenge things and push the envelope a little bit. And there can be some skepticism on the operations side. And I think that's where you really have to take the time. We have to take the time to really understand where that skepticism is coming from. And sometimes, like what we've done at RXO is we've actually developed explainability tools for our operations. We've done this with pricing, for example. So they can really understand, hey, the system telling me this price, I don't know, because this is kind of how I would price it, in the past before we had this automation. But if they have something that they can look at and see, hey, this is kind of how this was developed and devised, it gives them confidence. And if they disagree with it, they have a conversation with us, and we evolve the algorithms and evolve the formulas. So, but yeah, overall, I think that partnership, though, and that trust is absolutely critical to making strong progress on the automation side. So,
what about on the shipper side, where you're proposing something to a customer that is like, we can automate this thing for you, but the shipper is saying, well, I have to run that by IT and make sure they're okay with you doing that for us. Is there any sort of friction on that end, or no?
Not typically, no, because again, I think it's more like a stylistic approach to the conversation. You just have to be willing to listen. Whether it's technology, whether it's an operational process. In my mind, if friction kind of manifests out of the gate, I think it's, in my mind, a notation to kind of take a step back and understand, why those walls are going up. So more of an interpersonal response, but
yeah.
Yeah.
So we have about 30 seconds left. Melissa, I'm interested to know kind of like roadmap-wise where things go from here, not just with Gnosis, but sort of across everybody who's serving you from a data, from a technology perspective, from a service perspective. How are you thinking about like what can be automated in the near and kind of long term?
So we actually have this year had initiatives which we call sustainability efforts, but it's in terms of efficiencies in reporting and automation and things like that. So we actually have a team that's dedicated to improving the way that we're pulling data. So they're working with all of our forwarders, they're working with our carriers, they're working with all of the data points, and soon, to be Gnosis as well. And they're actually automating or ingesting the information automatically versus us getting multiple reports in a day and then, deciphering the data through that. So they're ingesting all of that into our ERP system and then spitting out the information to us. So we have like MicroStrategy where we're creating dashboards, and we're now able to go on and like one-click pull data, versus, like I said, using all the reports and trying to capture all that. So the next steps for us is to continue down that path and then work through exception reporting, right? So now that we have all of the foundational data, what do you need to see every day from that data to make your jobs easier?
Okay.
So that's going to be something. And then, of course, we expect to take the next steps, like I mentioned, with Gnosis and the integration, as well as appointment scheduling and things of that nature. I think it was interesting about the TMS. We do have a TMS system. However, there isn't the capabilities that we need for our international side. So Gnosis was also able to give us some value-add services to take care of that need.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Melissa, Alyssa, Jake, thank you guys. Amazing conversation. Definitely seek them out if you want to talk to any of them about anything they talked about or anything else. I'm sure they'll all be available. So thank you very much. Big round of applause. All right, and stay here if you want to hear about Expedited. My colleague, Kathy Roberson, is going to be leading a panel on that right now, right? Yeah? Yeah, perfect.